Hey guys, I'm VaulSC. Thanks for checking me out. As usual, we're going to talk about the Japanese Sectorial Army, otherwise known as a JSA, who were once part of Yuqing, the vanilla faction, and then they got sick of that. There was an uprising, and they broke off to become one of the non-aligned armies. We're going to talk about them in this video. I'm going to be discussing strategy and tactics and going through the profiles, just like I do in some of my other sectorial videos. One of the first things I want to say about JSA is that they are the best example of what a sectorial army is supposed to be. The best example of what a thematic list is. They do that better than other sectorials do. And what I mean by that is that if you're giving an elevator pitch to somebody maybe interested in the models or JSA in general, and you're explaining just in a bit of a brief nutshell kind of way what they're about, you're saying stuff like, well, this is the faction that has the cyber ninjas and the sci-fi samurais, and they're about getting into close combat. They're that sort of style, the futuristic anime style Japan army, and that's what JSA is and what they do. You know, you look into it a bit more and you start playing them and you get them on the table and paint the miniatures and see how they work on the tabletop, and that turns out to be the case. You've got models which definitely represent that sort of vibe, and you've got rules mechanics which really are geared about stealth and getting up close and bashing people with big katana style swords in a lot of cases. So that's really what they're about. If you look at other sectorials in infiNity, for example, I'm going to make the example of Morats. You're trying to do the same thing there, and you can, but not to the same extent. Morats you might pitch as this barbaric race of aliens who are really into brawling and aggression and getting up into your face and smashing stuff. And then you start to play them on the tabletop and find that, well, they don't particularly want to get into close combat all that often, most of the units that is, and they're not particularly aggressive a lot of the time compared with other armies. And when you look at their strengths, it's more about resilience. They're immune to jammers because of veteran, and they don't care as often when the lieutenant dies. And otherwise, you're playing a fairly mundane kind of, mechanically kind of army. I think the best Morat that encapsulates that sort of style is the Krakot Renegade, because he's wild and unpredictable because of metachemistry, and he can be very aggressive because he can gain extra movement speed. He's got the chest mines for up close, and he's got Berserk, and he behaves like I think a Morat should. But back to JSA. JSA, you've got the motorbikes, you've got the samurais, you've got the ninjas, you've got people, you've got a variety of different people who can disappear into the shadows, into the smoke, and cut things down. I have been asked to do a JSA review a few times recently, and I even did a poll on my YouTube channel that you might have noticed in the last couple of days, and a fair chunk of people want to talk about JSA, and I'm kind of in the mood for it, so I'm going to go with that. I don't want to put it out there that I'm always sort of taking crowd requests for what sectorials to cover. It's usually going to come down to what I'm in the mood for. But let's launch into it. Let's get down to some basics. What I want to cover next is the strengths and weaknesses of this faction, because if I'm going to be honest with you, I don't really put JSA up there in the top 10% of sectorials nowadays in terms of strength, in terms of potential to win ITS events. That being said, infiNity, as we've always noticed, is a fairly fair game. If you are in a local meta where there's a community and maybe 15-20 people play infiNity, and your very best player shows up to your event and decides to run JSA for that particular event, they're still likely to win regardless of whether they play JSA or Druze or the new Shazvasti or Toha or whatever it might be. But if you have a group of people and they're all exactly similarly skilled in terms of ability with infiNity, and one player plays a JSA and you've got other players with Nomads and Hakaslam and Toha, then I personally expect the JSA win rate to be a little bit lower in some cases. Let's talk about why that might be. So first weakness I find with JSA, generally in infiNity, one of the things you're wanting to do is to give a heavy machine gun to one of your models and get that model to pull the trigger on it effectively. But when you come to JSA and you look at the models that can carry an HMG, you look at, first of all, the Kaisotsu. He's Blister skill 10, can go on a link team taking up to 13, got 5 dice, and then there's no other really skills to prop that up. So you may be shooting inefficiently at a model in the distance that is applying mods on you. If you do take a hit, you're not very resilient, you lose that gun. Whereas another faction like Pan-O or Yu-Ching might come up with a Swiss Guard or a Hacktow or something to that effect and apply mods and good ballistic skill and do a better job of it. You look then to a model like the Oyurai, the tag. Well, you have to base a list around that tag. We'll talk about the tag more specifically with that profile, but it's a very different kind of option. Or let's say you go to one of my favorite choices, the TR bot, and use them offensively with your assisted fire. Well, every faction can do that, but again, you know, compare that to the Q drone, you're still putting the HMG in the hands of a model that is very average with it. So when it comes to that long-range role of clearing out arrows in the enemy's deployment zone, whether that be a sniper or a TR bot or just a flashball spot or a war core, JSA don't have the best options, in my opinion, when it comes to doing that between the ranges of 24 to 32, that sort of distance. So with that strength missing, you may find after you get into JSA and paint up your beautiful models and get into killing and playing quite a lot, that one aspect of the game feels a little bit weak, and you need to come up with solutions for that. And your solutions, you know, just you may start missing that role, especially if you come from other factions. The next drawback that I think I want to highlight is that you've got a faction with some cheap models and a lot of mid to expensively priced models, but there aren't any super cheap warband models in the likes of the Guangxi from the old Yuching Sectorial, or a faction I should say rather than Sectorial, or the Shaolin Monks, for example. You've got Kaisotsus, which are very, very cheap at just 9 points, and you can take as many of them as you want. But again, it's not very efficient to just fill your list and swamp your list up with lots and lots of Kaisotsus, because you're wanting to also use points for the stuff that's actually going to do work. And the Kaisotsus really are just going to be sitting there as cheerleaders. They're not even defending the deployment zone with chain rifles. So you compare that to Caledonian Volunteers, for example, or the Line Kazakhs. When you come to Ariadne, you've got a range of guys which also have chain rifles available to them. So there is that. You're generally going to be playing limited insertion style lists or your larger lists, which maybe get to around to the 14, 15 order mark tops. So that can be a little bit of a problem. The third drawback, and I think this links to what I was just talking about, and that is that if you really splash out and you go in there and you grab an Arigato and a ninja and you want an Oniwaban as well, and you want Yojimbo and you want one of the heavy infantry, you kind of hit the points cap pretty quickly. So you're finding that if you want to go out there and take a Shikami and a ninja and an Oniwaban, you've got several models which seem to be just doing the same role, and yes, they're covering a bit more of the table, but it's not particularly efficient. These are all models that need a lot of orders to do really, really well and achieve their potential, but the resources are being spread too thinly over everybody, so it can be hard to get a really good working JSA list going unless you have a combination of, your understanding of the models and your understanding of the list and a really good, well-prepared list and understanding of what to do in the game. It can be quite difficult. So that's the stuff which I believe prevents JSA from really being noticed as one of the more powerful ITS factions and winning lots of tournaments compared to the top dogs, who in my view are factions like, well, at the moment it's still Toha, the new Shazvasti, very, very strong, OSS, Varuna, Vanilla Hakislam, Vanilla Nomads. Those guys for me are right up there, whereas JSA is maybe down towards the middle or lower to the bottom. But what makes JSA good? Why, and I think this is probably why people are tuning in and wanting to watch the video, what can you achieve them? What becomes powerful about them? What are their strengths? Well, for me, it's the ability to run a very, very cheap link team that you can use to fuel the more powerful things in your army. So you have a nice big squad of Kaisotsus there. You take a few bots, maybe a couple of spare Kaisotsus that you can put back into the link team with a command token if you lose members. And then you prop that up with a couple of point men. You look at the big selection of profiles and you pick 2 or 3 of them to make use of the orders. Not 4 or 5, it's going to be 2 or 3 of them. So with access to the characters that you can't really get anywhere else, Kitsune, Mushashi, Yojimbo, you can actually fuel these guys. And if you know where to move with them, you know what orders to use, you know what positioning to use, you combine that with smoke, you can start scalping out some really powerful targets. And JSA is a very scary army to face if you're trying to deploy, you know, a big tag out in the midfield or heavy infantry link, things where single targets go down really easily in close combat to the assassins, the ninjas. So we'll talk about that a bit more. I think now we'll just go through all the profiles. In terms of collecting JSA, I think that the army box that includes the you know, the basic kaisotsus and you know, just the Daio, what do you call this guy? Daiokai Dengeki Tai, even though I don't like him that much, and the Karoshi Rider, that box that that came out when Uprising came out, I think that's fine to start with. Otherwise, work your way through this video with me, and I might go through a couple of example lists at the end, and basically it's just a matter of purchasing the things that you're going to put most often into the list, that you're going to use most often, and then sprinkle in the, you know, flavorful profiles depending on taste. It's like a recipe for a beautiful dish, shall we say. Let's go through it. Alright, so the bikes. I really miss the fact that these guys used to be in Yuching, but they are JSA only now. So the Arigato is it's decent. I like these guys because you can you know, use them as your reserve trooper and pick a route around the table and get some quick kills in with preferably a Spitfire being my favorite profile there. I don't particularly like the Assault Hacker. I mean, it used to be a good profile, you know, a few years back, but nowadays I think with Killer Hackers, even in link teams, able to fire a picture over next to you and just kill you, it's not really great. The Arigato Killer Hacker can be quite fun. You can zoom across to their side of the table and just zip in next to a repeater and kill their hackers with your killer hacking device. So that is a wonderful profile, and it can be a very swift specialist, although I prefer not to think of him in that role when you've also got specialists which can infiltrate. We'll be talking about the Ryukin, and of course the Killer Hacker Ninja being able to do a similar sort of thing. But if you compare the Ninja to the Arigato Killer Hacker, the bike probably gets over there quicker because you've got a combination of your impetuous move out for, what is it, 14 inches, plus, you know, another order is going to be able to get you very close to their repeater, and then one more order after that and you're already hacking them. So that could be a very quick way of knocking out enemy hackers, and then you've got the light shotgun as you come closer to their deployment zone. So that would be one of the profiles. I generally would take the Spitfire if I'm going to run the Arigato, because for me that's the purpose of this unit. That's the role. It's to go around there, clear up cheap cheerleading targets. You want to use this guy to knock off things like war cores and flash pulse bots very quickly. And you can even return your Rambo piece back to your deployment zone because of its absolute speed. And honestly, that's not a bad idea. If it's a choice, you've got 2 orders left. If it's choice between trading this guy for one more flash pulse bot kill or just driving back to your deployment zone with the last 2 orders, I definitely go with that, because then you can use his order next turn. He can help defend your deployment zone. He can provide arrows in some limited fashion, and you can use him for another run later on. So I would expect to see this guy not on every list, but not in 0 lists either. I personally might run him in, you know, somewhere between 20 and 60% of my JSA lists. I don't really play JSA much these days, so hard to say. But if you aren't using anything else that's planning on going directly over to their line, then this guy's a good choice. It's just that, you know, you'll also have a Rushi a lot of the time. You'll also have your Jimbo a lot of the time. You'll also have a Sectorial infiltrating ninja a lot of the time. Well, I say ninja when I mean Oniwaban or what do you call a Kitsune. And if you're going to be pumping all the orders into something like that, then you may not need the bike as well. Unless you maybe got 2 groups, hard to say. But yeah, this guy's not bad for a secondary group. If say you're running a 15 order list, put the bike in the second group, because he doesn't need that many orders to go over there and do some shooting and then get into a bit of total cover. Rico Oda, I think, is a very important character, and that's because a lot of the time you're running the kaisotsus by themselves and they've got no point man. So it says here you can take the Kenpai with the kaisotsus, or you can throw in a Damaru there. You're not really going to put the Damaru Spitfire in a lot of Kenpai lists, and a lot of Kaisotsu lists. really for shooting, it'd either be the Kenpai Tai Shock Marksman Rifle for that range, and that's a choice I'd take quite a lot. And we'll talk about him in a moment. But if you're not going to run the Kenpai Tai, I'd put Rico Oda in there, because later into the game, once you've lost your ninja and Saito's dead or whatever it's going to be, or the bike's been destroyed, you may need to move out turn 3 with your Kaisatsus and get to some objectives and do a last little bit of killing at the end of the game. And it's much better to have Yuriko there with her BS-12 combi rifle +3 for the Link team than it is to have, a basic Kaisatsu who's BS-10 for that kind of move. Secondarily, she helps defend your Link team with her mines, especially with Mine Layer. She is a decent specialist. I take the Panzerfaust profile because you can cover off a few small angles as an ARO piece. And she's a BS-15 Panzerfaust with 2 dice. So that can be a very big deterrent for some opponents. And if they come at her with, say, a Bulleteer and she has to dodge, well, she's got Hyperdynamics, so Phys 14 dodge and 6 Sense level 2. So I think Rico Oda is very strong. She does cost a bit of points, but again, I think it's going to be a choice of, are you going to run a Kenpai Tai with a Shock Marksman Rifle to do that job, or not? And if you don't, then putting Rico Oda in that is a pretty decent idea. The EMETA is nice, but I just don't think it's as good as a Panzerfaust. For some reason, she doesn't cost any SWCs at all, so you may as well have the Panzerfaust. The EMETA has greater potential for shocking down tags and things, but it's just not going to come up as often as the need to use that Panzerfaust, I believe. So the Kaisatsus, again, we were talking about them at the start of the video. Take as many as you want. Don't be afraid to take a full Link team of these guys and a couple of extra, basic 9-point guys and treat them as cheerleaders and keep them near to your Link team so that if you do lose a couple of people, you can spend that command token reforming a 5-man Link. That's really worth it. You can even make them just your basic 10-point forward observers as well. So if the situation gets really desperate at the end of the game, you got your Link team up in the building and a couple of basic forward observer Kaisatsus at the bottom ready to be added to the Link team, and they're not needed for that for some reason, but you're out of specialists, you can move your Kaisatsu out and try pressing the button with Whip 12 on an objective. It's a backup, it's not really your first priority, your first port of call really, but they are a 10-point cheerleader. They're giving you extra orders which can be spent on your ninjas. So that's very, very good. The missile launcher, good ARO piece as always, but yeah, it is still only going to be BS-13, so as soon as it's up against something like a Bulleteer coming down at it with assist of fire, it is going to die most of the time. When you compare the Kaisatsus in JSA to the Kaisatsus that you can take in Ikari, I always lament the fact that Ikari just does it that much better, because for some reason they can have one Tanko in their Kaisatsu Link team, whereas in this Sectorial you can't do that. The Tankos have to go with other options. If you were able to take something like that, JSA would actually be a lot better in my opinion, but unfortunately you can't for some reason have that combination. You can put the Damaru in there, but we're going to talk about the Damaru in a while, and the longest range gun the Damaru has for that job is the Spitfire. And I really don't feel that, it's worth going, okay, Kaisatsu's plus Damaru's Spitfire, given his ballistic skill and the range of that gun. You may as well, if you're going to be bothering to do that, you may as well just go, okay, Shock Marksman Rifle BS-12, because at least you get MSV2 out of that. So that's my thinking with it. But anyway, you should be running the Kaisatsus in every list, unless for some reason you're going to go limit insertion and you're not going to bother with the core Link team. If for some reason you're going to make a big Tanko Damaru Link team or play all of the ninjas and tags or whatever you're going to be doing, most sensible lists will have a group of these guys, and for the reason that they are cheap. I would run the HMG occasionally. It's a nice cheap one. Again, BS-13 HMG, not the best, but if you've got nothing else which is going to be fulfilling that role of just moving out and shooting the really easy to kill targets that you need to clear out rather than running into roadblocks and wasting orders, then that's not a bad choice. To be honest, a good Kaisatsu Link team, I think, just off the top of my head, might be the Hacker if you're running the Rushi. If not, don't bother, because you're going to have killer hackers anyway to support your remotes. Maybe just, plain 3 Kaisatsus like that, or one Forward Observer, for example, plus the Kenpai Tai with MSV2. You could potentially have 2 Kenpai Tais in there. You could have one boarding shotgun, for example, one way to, I see myself doing it is having the chain of command guy and a really powerful lieutenant like Kitsune. So you take the cheap Kenpai Tai for that, and then you take Rico Oda anyway. So in a setup like this, for AROs, Yuriko's doing most of it with her Panzerfaust. Otherwise, you're just treating them as an auto battery. Like, they're just there for the orders and not really there for AROs. You maybe use the Ryukin with a heavy rocket launcher for that job. And then when they move out later in the game, you've got the close range boarding shotgun, you've got the Panzerfaust and combi rifle combination there from Yuriko. And they've got a specialist in there in the form of Yuriko or the Kaisotsu, and you've only spent 73 points. You haven't spent any SWCs, and this kind of setup allows you to then go ahead with more powerful lieutenants that can go over there and smash things. So that's enough about Kaisotsu specifically. We've already started talking about the Kenpai Tais, and I don't really think that these guys are particularly useful on their own, unless, again, your plan is to go with something like, okay, you're going to have a 10-order limited insertion list, and you're going to make your lieutenant something which is going to go and hit things like Kitsune, and you're just chucking your Kenpai Tai in there just for chain of command, even though he's not adding any link bonuses. Just playing the Kenpai Tai MSV2 by himself is not really worth it when you could spend the same, similar points on a Ruishi, which is better because it can have assisted fire. And there's better speed, so that's a better choice. But the Kenpai Tai really is going to be seeing the most use in a link team. For just one SWC, you've got the Shock Marksman Rifle in a link, so BS-15 and the extra dice MSV2, very powerful. And you'd want to be doing that if you've also got your Jimbo in your list. Your Jimbo, I expect to see in the majority of JSA lists, like we're talking 80 to 90% of serious JSA lists. Because, well, we'll talk about your Jimbo later, but having that smoke combo with something like this is very, very crucial. We were talking at the start of the game about, start of the discussion video about how JSA doesn't really have a good HMG for just clearing things from your deployment zone. This isn't too bad so long as you can get your Jimbo to move up with Impetuous, lay down smoke, and then move this guy a little bit further forward towards the enemy deployment zone and get into a 24-inch range band. Well, then you do have a pretty decent gun for clearing things out. But again, you're going up against something like a heavy infantry model in a link team with a missile launcher. Again, this guy's not going to get too much benefit out of MSV2 in that case because he's got 6 status level 2 on the other side, and you're still going to be lamenting, not having something like a Hack Tower or a Swiss Guard or something with that muscle for cracking things. But he is still good and still definitely worth running a lot of the time. Let's move on to the Karoshi Rider. This was a new choice that came out in Uprising, and I'm not the biggest fan of it. I do see him on the table, but again, not the biggest fan. If you're going to be running a bike and you're going to be doing a lot of shooting work with it, you may as well run the Arigato because it's cheaper, right? So you come back to the Arigato, 26 points, 1 SWC for a Spitfire. It's still got Mimetism, whereas the Karoshi really is only adding Dogged to that. And what you're wanting to be doing is winning the face-to-face rolls, not, surviving longer once you lose them. That's the thought there. You're paying a fair few extra points for the close combat ability, and yes, it's able to get into close combat and use that CC-22, but we note here that it doesn't have any martial arts abilities unless I'm blind. Kinematic level 2 is kind of useful, but only when you're dodging, and when you're on a bike, you have a big penalty to dodging. You are a specialist, but yeah, I mean, you've got so many other things in the faction which can deploy next to the objectives and press the buttons very effectively. So I don't particularly like the Karoshi. Given that you're probably going to have your Jimbo in the list anyway, your Jimbo's much better at getting into close combat because he's got NWI rather than Dogged. He can fire the smoke grenades first, and when he does get into close combat, he's really going to mess them up, whereas this thing goes up against like a tag. It might take a while to chop through it with just AP and shock on the weapon, right? And CC-22, it might even lose the close combat occasionally, whereas that's not going to happen with you Jimbo. So in a faction where you've got so many other things which can really deliver the close combat so much more effectively, and you've got other bike shooting options, I don't really think that I could recommend this model. As a lieutenant and also a specialist, can be kind of good for running out there and grabbing the box in the mission like supplies. that's maybe an option. But again, you're playing supplies, you're probably going to be moving in with your Jimbo, firing the smoke grenade onto the supply crate, and then running off with it with something like a Ryukin or a Killer Hacker Ninja, right? So that's the Karoshi Rider, not the biggest fan. Coming to the Ryukin Unit 9, let's talk about the Heavy Rocket Launcher Pro, because it's almost like two different units entirely packed into the same thing. So the Heavy Rocket Launcher operates completely differently. It starts in camo instead of having ODD, and has a Heavy Rocket Launcher for AROs instead. I believe he's relatively cheap. He's a good way of spending SWCs. This is a faction where sometimes you're writing lists and you realize that you've barely spent any SWCs for some reason. Especially if you're not running much heavy infantry, so he could be a good way of allocating that. Some people have a bad time using him as an ARO piece because he's just BS12 and he only fires one shot, and the heavy rocket launcher, they may just tank the armor save anyway. But I like to think of him as a limited sort of ARO piece that will only reveal and shoot at some of the weaker and easier targets. He can be a nice way of defending one side of the table against drop troopers, for example, because he's in marker state and can reveal and shoot in any direction. But don't forget about his potential as an attacking piece as well. You know, when they're up against JSA, they may feel like you don't have that many guns. He may be on top of a building somewhere. Don't be afraid to stand him up and start shooting with your burst 2 in the active turn and the surprise attack from limited camouflage. He's got an X-Visor if you happen to be a little bit too far out of range, and you might get some mileage out of him. And he's just 23 points, so this is the kind of model that can afford to be a cheerleader, you know, with the amount of points you spend on him, and still get a bit of mileage in the active and reactive turn with the shooting. So I don't mind him. If you've got enough points left at the end after including all of the important stuff, he's not a bad option. I don't expect him to be seen in 100% of JSA lists, though. I might be expecting to see him in maybe 20 to 60%. I know that's a wide range, but it's hard to pin down. It depends on your style a little bit. Going to the other Ryukin, who's, I think, a bit more popular. This is quite a powerful unit when it comes to the midfield fighting and button pressing, the objective grabbing sort of role. You can place him out in the midfield, right into total cover. The mine can defend people coming over to kill him. And then he can go up pressing buttons, and obviously excels at shooting other infiltrators with his submachine guns. You can also crack out other marker state units by putting mines next to them and coming up and discovering them and that kind of fun stuff. So he's appropriately priced. The 0.5 SWCs is for the mine layer ability. This unit is not bad. I wouldn't overdo it and take too many of them. I think I'd only run one of them, a maximum, and try and use that for button pressing on one side of the table and the Killer Hacker Ninja for the other, and just try and, you know, use the right one for the right role and the right strengths depending on where my opponent is deployed. One thing that they can suffer against a little bit is stuff like speculative fire, or templates and things like crazy koalas, that sort of thing. This is not a unit that's in marker state, so your opponent's going to know where it is. It becomes a bit predictable, and it's not so much a worry about MSV2 because you can generally play around that, but as soon as you start coming into range of things that could just one-shot you with a template, or hanging out in the midfield where it's easy for a Hunzakut with a grenade launcher to just plop a template on top of you, or an EM spec fire, for example, from the Druze, or even just Datrazi Renegades with just grenades will give this guy a bit of a bad time. But so long as you don't commit too heavily into your game plan into these guys and you use them appropriately, they're very, very useful. And I think you'll definitely see a lot of these guys on the field when you're playing JSA players. Dokuset Super Tai, I really missed the fact that these guys used to be in Yuching. They're appropriately costed Doctor or Engineer for just 14 points, Willpower 13. There's nothing not to like. BS10's a bit low, but you don't expect to be doing a lot of fighting with Doctors and Engineers at all. So if you're running good strong aero pieces in your list, like you're probably going to be, like the Kaisotsu Missile Launcher, Kenpai Tai MSV2, you take a Doctor. Whereas if you're running a list which seems to be based on the Oyuroi and the Tanko Link teams and stuff like that, well, you take an Engineer. But even in that case, the Doctor's probably still going to be there for the heavy infantry. War Corps is a War Corps. Not too much to say. There's nothing specific about JSA there, so we'll move on. The Daiokai Dengeki Tai is a big fat model with the big swords that comes in the box set, and a lot of people own them. I've said since day one that this is not a very powerful model, and it sort of suffers from the same syndrome that other things do in this sort of points bracket and style. So when you look at the Alpha Seed or the Sogarat, those models that are in the sort of 40s to 50s points that are heavy infantry, they don't typically do that well in infiNity. They've taken even more of a slap in the face now that Fatality Level 2 is linkable. You imagine using this guy to defend an area of the table, and he's sitting there with his multi-marksman rifle or Red Fury and just trying to block hits with his Armor 5 and NWI 2 wounds. Then Shishkin comes along and is just critting him left and right and not caring about his armor. This guy's just going to go down. But just generally, you compare to this guy to a model like the Mo Wang. The Mo Wang has NCO, so it's better as a Rambo. It has mimetism, so it's better at face-to-face rolls. This guy doesn't have that. He's going to be kind of inefficient, moving around the model looking for things to shoot at. A good opponent's going to hide important things from him. Or just shoot back at him with things that he can't really deal with that well, like a post-human sniper with a, on the other side of the table that will outrange him and have TO camo anyway. In terms of getting into close combat, he's paying extra points for that, but barely ever doing it because he starts in deployment zone and he's slow, doesn't have any movement abilities. You're in a faction, we've got so many other things to get the job done. If you've got this guy, in your deployment zone, but you also happen to have your Jimbo and a ninja over here, or whatever it may be, you're going to be sending those guys into close combat, not him. So you have to ask the question, why take him then? What is his role? It seems to be just a combination of shooting and AROs, but like we just talked about, high armor is not really the way to do AROs unless you got, a fuck ton of it, like armor 9 or 10, or, some other abilities like symbiomates or TO camo or something like that. That's when you're AROing very effectively. And in terms of aggressively shooting, well, he's not really going to do as good a job of it as, say, the Kenpai Tai and the Link team with MSV2 and Smoke, or even just your humble Arigato Spitfire who gets over there into the right range band more swiftly, that kind of stuff. I don't want to dwell on it too long. I know a lot of people like the model. Do your best with him, but at the end of the day, he's not going to be worth it. Even the special fire teams, it's just going to be a big points thing. It's not going to solve the problems that he has just by having an extra dice on him. It's not going to be worth it. And having these guys having to babysit him, they're not going to be doing anything either. So it's just not a really good commitment. Even the Daiyoko and 2 Domarus going around the table with that, I'd much rather recommend sinking the points into something like Mushashi and 2 Tankos if you're going to be playing that style. So there's Niko Aoyama. We sort of need to talk about him at the same time that we... Oh, I've skipped one. Okay. Damaru Butai. Let's talk about Damaru Butai, then we'll talk about Niko Aoyama. So Damarus, I've always found them to be such an interesting heavy infantry choice. They are so cheap because they are outfitted with close range stuff, and for some reason Corvus Belli gives you more points discounts the shorter range your abilities are, even though they may be very effective. So these guys have the amazing ability to combine Berserk with Martial Arts Level 3, allowing you to just crit things on above 50% chance when you're going in there, if you're going for a Berserk roll. If you're going up against a target that can only do a maximum of 1 wound on you as it AROs you, you can take that wound and you'll have 1 left and you're still going to eradicate whatever you attack because you're hitting them with either an EMCCW or a DACCW with Berserk, and you're just absolutely going to smash them. They do have Frenzy by the looks, so be careful about that, but wonderfully they retain cover and they're not going to impetuous out the start of the game. This is not a long-range unit as we talked about. The Spitfire is a model you can add in there if you're going to go full, fire team core, which I wouldn't recommend. But most of the time, I think these guys are all about the shorter-ranged models. I think for me, the standout profile here is actually this guy, the chain rifle EM, this guy here, who doesn't even have a combi rifle. And at 26 points, you're getting a guy that is pretty much a cheerleader, right? So he's able to sit around and not add much value to the game for a lot of the time and still provide that order and still do okay. The way I use him is I move him out into the midfield somewhere and just hide in the corner of a building or behind a wall. And as soon as they come past him, well, they're not going to remove him in close combat, are they? It's not worth trading a 29-point ninja with this guy, because this guy's just going to kill him. Or a Caliban, for example, coming around to try and Prathai on him. The Caliban's just going to get berserked with a DA CCW or an EM CCW, and that's not going to go well for the Caliban. If they try and move in with an expensive piece like a Bulleteer and just cut him down, well, he may be able to just chain rifle the thing at that point and soak up a bit of damage with 2 wounds armor 3. That may happen. Or just dodge away with physical 14 from a distance. That might happen as well. So that's a really annoying way to play the Damaru. I even like doing that with a lieutenant. So you make the Damaru your lieutenant, you move out into midfield, and he's positioning himself with the lieutenant's order without impacting your order pool very much. And you've got chain of command with the Kenpai back in the Kaisotsu Link team. That could be really, really cool as well. Or you're firing smoke out into the midfield with your Jimbo, or maybe even Saito or Kitsune, and you're creating a bit of a smoke cloud, and then you're running your Damaru past because you can afford to lose them or afford to trade something. What you might find yourself doing is something like a coordinated order where Kitsune is going after one thing, but you're also moving up the Damaru through the table with your coordinated orders to a point where it can just attack with a couple more orders spent, and you're just going crazy into close combat with that EMCC weapon, and that's just going to ruin the day of a tag, right, or some important target. So that's very, very powerful. And he has EM grenades as well with physical 14. So with that strategy, coordinated orders, you're doing something on this side of the table, but your Damaru is moving up with every coordinated order. You get to a point where he just moves in, he throws an EM grenade over the wall, hitting on 11. That could absolutely trash a Link team or an important target on their side, like the tag or heavy infantry, an attack robot, that kind of thing. So you can do all of this without too many orders and without spending too many points. I think that's the real strength of the Damaru, in my view. Yes, you can play him in the Link team. Yes, you can give him guns. I don't feel like that's the best way to do it. So if you're going to play a limited insertion list and go balls to the wall, fire team core, this is a group that can't really go around muscling people with the big HMG, and even the Spitfire. You're going BS-15, 5 dice, that's cool. But you need to get so much out of it to justify the investment you put into them. And remember, when you go into close combat, you don't need 5 of them to be able to kill something. You only need 1 Damaru to be able to do that job. I sometimes think about running a whole group over them on the other side of the table, then breaking the link and doing a coordinated spec fire. So they all run next to this wall or building, then you break the link up and you spend a command token, and all 4 of them, spec fire an EM grenade at the same target. You're going 4 dice on 11s, and that is going to be very brutal when you go up against, say, a Link team of knights or Invincible Army, for example, with their Zuyongs. I mean, that's just going to trash them, right? But the problem is you've got to get across there, and you've got to find a spot to do that from, and it may not be that easy. It's worth a go, though, if you're just looking at having a bit of fun. It's just not going to be that consistent. Like, the list I would build for that is to put Kitsune as your infiltrator out there, just infiltrator in hidden deployment 24 inches up, then move her through and throw a smoke grenade, then spend the rest of your orders just running across with all the Damarus and setting up in the smoke and spec firing everything onto their Link team and just causing that havoc. But the game's not won there. Your opponent may still have other stuff which they can then retaliate with and ruin your days, so it's just not that reliable. It's pretty cool, just not that reliable. I think we'll leave it there for the Damarus. Just adding that Niko, I don't think he plays that same role that the super cheap Damaru does. Although, for an extra, how many points are we talking? Yeah, it's only a couple. You may as well take Aoyama a lot of time because he's even more effective in that close combat status. But yeah, infiNity is a game where even 2 points in a list can be something you need to cut. If you can get the job done with just 1 Damaru without needing any of Niko's extra stats or abilities, you may as well. But I mean, this guy, he just takes it to another level with his explosive CCW. I suppose that's pretty cool at killing objectives like looting and sabotaging. That could be very, very strong with an even higher CC stat for his Berserk. He's the one thing in the game, well, actually there's more stuff now, I think, but he can have martial arts level 3 going on for CC 27 and Berserk for CC 23. So that normal roll is going to be critting on a 7 plus on a D20. That's pretty stupid. Yeah, so this guy, for the same reasons we talked about the Damaros being useful and having a place in lists and doing very, very well, I really like this guy. Yeah, so if you're just going to take one Damaru like I outlined, and you're just going to take the basic Damaru, then by all means do that. Spend the extra couple of points on him if you can afford it. So yeah, there's the 26 point with just the EM CCW, an extra point if you want DA, or an extra 2 points if you want the explosive. I'm kind of partial to the EM close combat weapon, but yeah, that's just me. Karakuri Special Project. So when I started playing infiNity a few years back, must be nearly 4 years now, I really looked at this model and didn't see any value in it because it's kind of expensive and it doesn't really play any of the roles you need. It doesn't make a good cheerleader, it doesn't make a good aero piece, it's not a very good attacking piece compared to other things you can take, and it just soaks up a little bit of damage, and it's not even the best specialist because you got the ninja for that and so on. But recently they went and changed the rule for total immunity. So if you're thinking about running the Karakuri, I think your first step would be to go onto the wiki and just have a very careful read of this, how total immunity works. And it wouldn't be a bad idea to go onto the forums and do a search for total immunity and have a look at some of the threads where people are discussing how the rules work, because it's a bit of an awkward rule, it's a little bit ambiguous sometimes, but long story short, the Karakuri is going to be armor 6 in most cases because it's allowed to use its BTS value to make armor saves, and it's never going to take more than one armor save at a time from stuff like DA or explosive or fire ammunition, because total immunity treats all that as normal ammunition. So suddenly this has gone from being a kind of marginalized piece to being a model that actually does play the aero game very, very well. Does kind of play the specialist role very, very well because you can stick out there for longer, and kind of does play the attacking game kind of well because you can't even be hit by flash pulses now. So you're walking out onto the battlefield. Let's say you're playing comm center, so you're just walking out of your deployment zone. Oh, there's a walker. Oh, there's 2 flash pulse spots. They can't do anything. You just ignore them and you go out there and press the buttons as if they weren't there. Or once you come out to the middle with your Mark 12, for example, that's my favorite profile, the Mark 12. And you come into range, then you start shooting them, and you start just picking them off for free without any problem, without any danger of being stunned. Then when it's their turn, you've got your Karakuri hanging out in cover next to an objective in the middle of the table. They're trying to kill it, so they're hitting it with an HMG or a rocket launcher or a sniper or whatever it might be, and you're finding that your armor 6 effectively plus cover, and they've got to remove it down to past the dogget state, otherwise you're constantly arrowing as they're coming across the table. So that can be very, very powerful for slowing them down in a game where maybe they have to get to an objective room or press buttons on things, and suddenly that 43 points isn't actually that bad an investment. If you've got a couple of kills with it, you pressed a button with it, and you've cost your opponent an entire turn, maybe even more than that, getting rid of it. So I really don't think this guy's a bad choice at all. You've got the Damaru option now for the Karakuri plus 2 Damarus, or the Harris of them. I think that might be a bit of an over expenditure, although for the reasons we talked about earlier, it's maybe not the worst idea. Let's say you take Aoyama Lieutenant. Let's pretend we've already got a Kaisotsu, a team with a Kenpaitai chain of command. If we go back and we grab a couple of basic guys here, so we've got Aoyama for the explosive close combat and the Damaru with the EM close combat weapon. We've spent 97 points. It's still a lot of points, but you imagine these guys in the midfield. The Karakuri is providing the arrows with 2 shots with total immunity, so she loses some face-to-face rolls and tanks a lot of pain, occasionally winning them because she's shooting back with 2 dice. And as they're getting closer and closer, you're helping to defend her with the chain rifles from some angles. And obviously you can't take this apart in close combat because it's Aoyama, it's Niko and the Damaru. So that might be worth a go. I don't see this winning like every other game, but it's reasonably strong. You've just got to manage the cost of it and just manage what you're doing with the rest of your list, because infiNity's about accomplishing a variety of different goals, not just 1 or 2 goals. So this isn't going to win all the time, but it may be worth a shot. I don't think it's the worst thing in the world. You'll get some mileage out of it. But Karakuri, definitely playable now that Total Immunity has been buffed like crazy. It's been buffed too much in my view. But, you know, you may as well leverage that if you're a JSA player, and if you like the model or if you want to proxy something else to the Karakuri, then by all means. I'm going to be playing the Karakuri in Ikari Company a fair bit, and I'll be using the Dakini, because I quite like the new OSS sculpt for the Dakini. Moving on to the Shikami, I've never been a huge fan of this guy. Love the model, love the concept of him. I think it's so cool that he's got super jump and climbing plus, and he's a beast in close combat. Only thing I don't love about him is that he starts back at your deployment zone, he's going 4-4 speed, and he's a model that is going to need to rely on shooting a lot of the time. So yeah, ODD is a beautiful ability when you're shooting things, but just a combi rifle, what's going to happen with him a lot of the time if you're running him is he's going to move out there, and yeah, he's going to win the face-to-face roll, but you know, they may be tanking armor saves at just as BS, you know, 12 combi rifle, damage 13, they've got cover, so it's not going to do that well. And then sometimes he's going to be going up against, you know, things which can really pack a punch in ARO, and having to sort of cautious move past them, and he's going to be quite slow at that. If you're trying to kill something in close combat, it's still going to be more effective to go out there with something which has Infiltrate and Mark Estate, and you've got plenty of options. There's the Ninjas, Onuwaban, Saito Togen, and Kitsune. Or if you're going to be going over there quickly, you've got your Jimbo and the bike and the smoke to deliver that. Being able to walk through a smoke grenade and not get shot at all is much better than, you know, having ODD and actually having to make the rolls. So for that reason, I don't love him. He is a specialist operative as well, but again, you've got the Ryukens, you've got the Ninjas for that, you've got other options for going out there and pressing the buttons. So spending that full 45 to 47 points on him is just not really my cup of tea. Which profile would you run if you had to, if you just love the model so much you really wanted to run him? It's hard to say. I like to think the assault pistol, just because you're trying to close with them as much as possible rather than shoot them from range, so you're trying to desperately get in there anyway, and you save 2 points. The Contender is probably better than the combi rifle in terms of AROs. You might occasionally use the Nimbus grenades for something, but just in general, I don't particularly love them. I guess the first profiles are the one to use a lot of the time, but again, I want to like him and I want him to be better, but I just don't feel that he's a superior choice to some of the other things you've got. The Tankos are formerly known as the, we've already forgotten them, the Harumaki, I think it was. These guys are interesting because you can run them solo, in which case they are super cheap for heavy infantry, just 23 points. And they can get some mileage out of Impetuous, moving out across the table and getting closer to close combat where they excel. Or you can link them, in which case they are very cheap heavy infantry models in link teams. Again, Ikari does it better, because Ikari allows them to mingle with cheaper stuff, which helps to bring the overall cost of the link team down, which is what you want. But that doesn't mean you can't run them. Let's say you take the big core team with 2 Damarus and 3 Tankos. That allows you to take, I would actually take 3 Tankos there. I'd take 2 missile launchers and 1 Flamen Spear, and then the Damarus can be the really cheap, you know, close combat guys, or maybe 1 Spitfire, and I'm building a limited insertion list around that, right? So that can work. If you're running the Musashi Haris, which I've done, by the way, I find it's kind of helpful. You can either have the missile launcher there just for the extra burst in reactive, but again, that's not too strong, because with just a 3-man link team, you don't have 6 Sense level 2, and they can pull a smoke shenanigans on you and shoot you through smoke with MSV2. I like the idea of taking 1 guy with the Flamen Spear and 1 guy with the SMG, so they cover a couple of different range bands, and then Musashi's there for the extreme close combat burst potential and the direct template. So you chuck Musashi in, and he's able to go in there with the chain rifle and the flash pulse and do a lot of stuff that the Tankos are missing. So they make quite a good team. Again, 74 points for this. It kind of helps to know what you're doing. They don't have a specialist in there, but it's a lot of fun, and I really love this combination. Having said that though, I think in the real serious JSA lists that I would try and come up with, if I'm going to be taking the Tankos, it would really just be like one of them. Just throwing in a single 23-point guy who's going to be a combination of a cheerleader and an ARO piece. And funnily enough, if he just moves into the middle of the table, he can be really annoying to remove, and he's just able to step out and whack somebody with his monofilament CC weapon at close range. That could be quite cool. Flaming Spear runs out of ammunition, but the Contender is still pretty solid, and there's still BS-13, even though they can't gain cover. So that can be really fun. You can have them come out with their impetuous move and just pick somebody off with the Flaming Spear, and they're just hanging out. And then as they get attacked in the opponent's turn, they're trying to dodge with Kinematica and getting back into cover. So that's just a perfect way of using them, I find. There's nothing wrong with that. I've run that in Ikari a few times where I've just had them on the flanks and there's a couple of them just sitting around. Another thing you can even do is you can have a group of them and you can have them unlinked at the start. They all impetuous, and then you link them back up again. You've got an extra bit of movement if you wanted, if your plan was to get across the table, right? So let's say you've got 2 Damaros and 3 Tankos, and there's a very clustered, dense table. Well, the Tankos move out with impetuous, and then before you spend your first order command token to link them all up with the Damaros, and then you start moving out, and the Damaros are lagging behind a little bit, but you've still got a little bit of extra leverage out of that if you're trying to get in range with your SMG or something like that later in the turn. So Tankos, very, very good unit. The tag, the Oyoroi Kirobutai. Now, a lot of people disagree with my assessment of tags like this, and my assessment is generally that a tag, its best strength is going to be its armor, and armor is at its most useful when you're losing face-to-face rolls, and that typically happens when you're taking AROs, right? You don't want this guy to be moving out around the table trying to kill things, failing abysmally because it can't hit anything, and but passing the armor saves during your active turn. That's not how you want to be doing it. You want to be actually blasting things and killing them. In the reactive turn, you want to be covering, some fire lanes and really blocking a lot of attacks, but my problem with that is that the AP HMG only does 1 wound at a time, whereas most other tags, or the heavy tags, can be shooting back with a multi-HMG doing much more damage. And he is armor 7 as opposed to 8, 9, or 10, which some of the other heavy tags have, so he can be a bit flimsy. But you're still paying, 86 points on him, so building the list around him, he lets you down occasionally when it comes to arrows and attacking. For the most part, he's going to be doing what it says in the box, doing tag stuff and being very powerful. But, given that people are reluctant to invest that many points on tags anyway, and for him to have a few gaps statistically in what he can do, it's not wonderful. There are some perks though. So martial arts level 1 means he's got stealth, which means he can move through the table without getting hacked until the hacker can actually see him, or unless the hacker's got 6th sense level 2. So that's a plus. The crazy koalas are also very good, especially for defending him against any potential assassins that might want to try and get him in close combat, right? So maybe some impersonator shows up next to him and tries to cleave him in half. They're only really going to have one go at it before the crazy koalas blow them up, and this guy may be able to stave off death with his high CC stat and his martial arts level 1, or even just kill them. And hey, if he does get into close combat with an objective, he's going to bash it pretty quickly with his Phys 17 and explosive CCW weapon, and on top of that, he's not going to miss with CC 21 as well, so pretty good for missions where you're bashing objectives in close combat, like looting and sabotaging. So that's nice. The pilot becomes a forward observer, so that's pretty cool as well. But again, I personally wouldn't run a lot of lists with this tag included. Yes, he's going to be useful for missions like Deadly Dance where you need a tag. He can be useful if you're trying to make a limited insertion list, but most of the time, I feel like less than 50% of the time, you'd take him. He's a pretty cool model. He did, I think, get a resculpt recently with the AP HMG. I can't quite remember, but he is pretty cool looking, so have a blast with the old modeling and such. Can be a lieutenant if you're willing to spend extra SWC, and that's not a bad idea if you've got the chain of command tucked away. So yeah, Oyoroi. We're going to gloss over the remotes because the remote choices are much the same as any other faction, and they don't really have any linkable options that I can see. So there's not too much to talk about remotes-wise, and we want to get through this. The Lu Duan is a model which has been in Yuching for this whole entire time and is available in some other sectorials as well. And you see him from time to time, but he is weak. He's not as good as the Rushi. Really, with just a Mark 12 and assisted fire, it's not really enough to merit when you could just be taking the Rushi, in my view. And the holo projector is very clunky when you're Silhouette 4. I've found that the best application of this model is to pretend to be something like a Evo repeater or just a baggage bot and deploy him on the side of the table and hope that something comes nearby to him to kill him, and then you spring the heavy flamer on them from the holo projector 1 state. That can be quite powerful. But having played him and played against him, I've never really seen him be that effective, you know, not in the majority of the games anyway. The Rushi is a different meta. We've always known the Rushi to be very, very powerful. Now that JSA have split away from Yuching, their technology maybe has lapsed a little bit and they have to spend an additional SWC point, half a point above the one that they previously had to. The Rushi, obviously very powerful, and you kind of need him in JSA because, again, you need that very reliable gun which swings the face-to-face rolls in your side. So you need to pair him with your Jimbo or Saito or Kitsune to be able to move into that smoke cloud and kill something effectively and then move back and have assisted fire there from a cheap Kaisotsu hacker, and that's how you play him. Sadly, this is a faction missing a lot of very efficient guns, so you kind of have to rely on them. The one thing I will say though is that if you are running that Kenpai Tai with the MSV2, you may not need him if you're going to be shooting from a point just outside of your deployment zone. But the thing is, this guy's much faster at getting over to their side of the table and just crushing those mimetism bots and shooting through smoke at models like Gazumatia, which are going to throw smoke and have dogged anyway and that kind of stuff. So the Kenpai Tai is not going to be as good at doing that as this guy is, as that attack piece going and ripping through stuff. Even the Arigato doesn't have shock on his guns like this guy does, so never forget how powerful he is. We're just going to all feel universally jealous, though, of what Dashat Company can do, which is to link him. So compared to that, JSA can't really compete, but the Rushi is still going to be very effective by himself, even without the link bonuses that Dashat Company can bring. The Ninja, we have known about ninjas for the longest time, and they are availability 3 in this faction. Some people are going to go out there, despite my recommendations, and just play all the ninjas they possibly can, and you know, that's fun to do a couple of times. You will get sick of it, because you'll lose games. But if you really want to, you can run 3 ninjas, and the Oniwaban, and Kitsune, and Saito Togan, and have them all invisible. The problem with that is that players are going to reveal you with sensors, and if you stay out of range of that, they're not going to be you know, close enough to your opponent, and you are going to need guns to kill things, and you're going to try and funnel orders into one model and find that if you're in hidden deployment with too many other things, you're not going to have enough orders on the table. It's not really going to be working. Having said that, the Ninja is one of my favorite profiles in the game. It's definitely top 10, maybe top 5. The killer hacking device is it. That's the profile you want to run. Yes, you can take a forward observer nowadays, but it's just an extra 6 points on a guy that is always going to be close range anyway. He's going to be whacking you with his sword way more often than he's going to be hitting you with his combi rifle, and he's going to be pressing buttons a lot of the time anyway. The tactical bow is fine for that surprise arrow. It's double action, very, very powerful. The forward observer doesn't even have a DACC close combat weapon, so for that reason alone, you kind of don't want to take the forward observer. The Assault Hacker, you wouldn't take him, except I think that he's worth taking in larger games, like 400, 500 points, when you can expect heavy infantry and tags, or even if you are playing in a limited insertion tournament, not a bad choice there. I've always thought about maybe taking the multi-sniper, just to surprise people, but again, you're paying points for something that can attack in close combat, but also wants to shoot, and you're never going to be doing enough of both to merit it. I've said that before in other videos. The non-specialist profile, for example, the 26-point tactical bow, you might even run that guy in a very specialist list, where if you know that you're making this one list for this specific mission where you don't need specialists, then there's your other list for the tournament, which is going to be used in all of the other games. You might even consider dropping off the specialist ability off him, especially if it's going to be a mission where they get extra points for killing specialists, for example. Or maybe you don't want him to be hackable in a mission like Transmission Matrix. So that 26 point profile may come up sometimes, and he's still a great assassin in the midfield to go over and just kill somebody. He's great at killing tags. If you can put a smoke grenade next to the tag and go over there and you're adding 6 to your dice and you're doing the DA hits with Fizz 12, that can and will kill tags, I assure you. I've done it before. It's especially effective if you're in there with 2 models, but even if it's just your one ninja, he's gonna take out your avatar or whatever it may be if they've left their tag out of position. The Oni Waban, I never really liked this guy back in the old days because what would happen is you'd be trying to superior deploy and some of the time he'd whiff that and you couldn't do much. Or if you're just running the boarding shotgun, you move around there and you run into some face-to-face roll and you get hit by a chain rifle and he's just dead. So it's hard to sort of balance him between killing something in close combat and shooting. And unfortunately, he doesn't have any smoke grenades with him. But they changed all that when they brought out the submachine gun profile, because now you've got a gun that can reliably kill things in that range band, and given that he's got surprise attack and TO camo, you are likely to win the face-to-face roll, and he suddenly becomes very, very useful at picking off people in the back line who have dogged in NWI, which is like your metachemistry CSUs maybe, or your Kwang Shi or Gazimati or stuff like that, and he can become very effective. And we're constantly saying this. Corvus Belli seem to think that if something has a submachine gun, it should cost less points. Everybody else in the community knows that a submachine gun makes a model better rather than worse, so you get an improvement to your model and a discount. It's like going into a store and finding that they've, upgraded, the latest cell phone, but also slapped a discount on it or something like that. And you're like, well, bit of a no-brainer, really. So if you're going to run the Oniwaban, it's that middle profile with the SMG that you want to go with. I don't like the lieutenant choice just because sometimes you're going to be wanting to go second, and in those games you might be wanting to put him into hidden deployment. And in games where you're going first and you want to go into hidden deployment, well, your lieutenant can't start in hidden deployment, so it just doesn't really make a lot of sense. Yes, it's kind of cool to spend that extra order if you're moving out there, if you're just going to plonk down your marker and start moving over and you've got your chain of command Kempaitai back in deployment zone, but I'm not really feeling it. It's better to be able to use hidden deployment where possible because it's such a strong ability. Shinobu Kitsune, the only faction that can run her, and one of the reasons just to pick up JSA in the long run is just she's available. This is the only sectorial that can run her, and she's a really fun character. Unlike the Oniwaban, she can put smoke down. Unlike Saito Togan, she's got a monofilament close combat weapon, and superior infiltration on top of that. So if you're willing to gamble with her, what you can do is make the roll for superior infiltration on a 16, deploy right next to the deployment zone, move past their line, throw a smoke grenade, and you eliminate the lieutenant or their tag. And it's like a cakewalk. Like, as long as you know what you're doing and where to throw things and where to put your model, there's very little your opponent can do to stop you from doing that. If you're a new player and you're being bullied by people who are, stronger players than you and they've got tags and heavy infantry and they use very obvious lieutenants, why not try that for a bit? Why not just try running her and don't run the lieutenant option. Just try and take first turn wherever possible. Make her your reserve model and deploy in hidden deployment with superior infiltration and just put her next to their line and they won't know where she is. And when it's your turn, you move around, get to a point where they can't see you, then throw a smoke grenade. Don't forget that spec fire will be on a 10, +3 for short range, -6 for spec fire. So she can do that without being able to see the target in some cases. It's much better to be able to see the target. But then you move through the smoke and you just absolutely murder them. What she doesn't want to do is come into range of mines and crazy koalas and waste her turn killing cheerleaders when she's so expensive and when so many orders go into her. But if you're up against an opponent that is running really tough sort of stuff, she is just what the doctor ordered. Like even like Toha with symbiomates, if you're using MA4, she's throwing 2 dice and critting on 15 pluses, so the crits are going to shred the symbiomates, that sort of stuff. Even if they've got total immunity to ignore the monofilament close combat weapon, which I believe it does now, the crit's still going to get them, right? So that's the way to go. In the long run, though, besides that gimmick, Shinobu is the kind of model that I like to run as a model that is capable of killing things with the combi rifle and surprise attack and TO camo, and then shrinking back into the shadows with, her Marcus State. After you've done a bit of a run with her and maybe killed a couple of things in close combat, got rid of a couple of cheerleaders with your shooting, and gone hidden somewhere and found a hiding place where she's quite hard to root out with people coming after her. And once they do finally come after her, you hit them with, say, the nanopulsar as they're just coming in to remove you with a chain rifle or whatever it may be, and get that done. Or you might just be dodging for eternity. Note that she's got Phys 13 and Kinematic level 2, so she may be dodging around corners with her 4-inch dodge move and doing that kind of thing. Great for rescue with multi-terrain and high Phys, but just all around, I really wish that she was still available in Vanilla Yu Ching, because I'd actually take her in a bunch of lists. But JSA, you're running a tournament. I don't see why you wouldn't have Kitsune in one of your lists for that practicality and that potential, and then maybe the other list run some other stuff. She is quite expensive, but very, very powerful if you know what you're doing. She does require some practice and theory and understanding of the game and understanding of what your opponent's models are capable of, but just such a cool unit. Even though she hasn't had a resculpt for ages, the old sculpt is really cute and really, really cool. Can't wait to see what they do with the next resculpt, but it might be a while off, given that she's still very, very popular. Saito Togan, so for a while, a lot of people thought that Saito Togan was a specialist option in the new JSA, but I think that was just a mistake and it got edited. So given that he doesn't have superior infiltration to do the kind of stuff that Oniwaban and Kitsune can do, and doesn't have the specialist option to be able to do what the ninja does, I feel like this guy's a bit niche. I think that he's kind of a fun choice for smashing objectives. Like I'd consider running him in looting and sabotaging, but for a lot of missions I'm leaning towards the ninja for the role the ninja plays, because the ninja's going to be just as good. The ninja doesn't need an extra point of CC or martial arts level 4 over top of what he already has to kill things in close combat, and the ninja's a specialist. Whereas if you're going for their throat, if you're going to go straight for their deployment zone, I do feel like the Oniwaban SMG is a bit better, or for a few extra points for Kitsune, what you can do. You're having to spend, I guess, another 8 points for Kitsune. What you're getting out of that is the ability to superior deploy, which is a pretty big deal. Even better in close combat, you also have the nanopulsar, which Saito doesn't have. And in some cases, the monofilament close combat weapon is going to be better than explosive, given that you're going to be critting so often with it. But that's not to say you won't take him for the reason I outlined. If you want to save points on that particular role, by all means, if you're going to be moving from the halfway mark with infiltration out there, or if you're going to be going after objectives specifically, I don't think you can really beat Saito for that job. Miyamoto Musashi. I think that this guy is probably the most underrated model in JSA. I don't see enough people taking him. I actually prefer the old classic regular guy above the new regular guy that can be linked, because I have a particular playstyle with him. I like to use his irregular order every turn, moving up into the midfield and just wedging himself in a place where they can't really ignore him, because they're going to have to come past him and come into his chain rifle range. And if they go and try and flush him out, what are they going to do that with? If they come in close, he'll chain rifle them. If they come into close combat with him, well, he's the best close combat, swordsman in the game. If they're trying to pick him off from distance, he's whip 15 with the flash pulse, and he's so cheap for something which does these short range AROs. He's not a long range ARO piece like a sniper, but he's what I consider to be a short range ARO piece which defends little sectional areas of the table, like your deployment zone or a midfield. He's great in an objective room, for example, or nearby to objectives that they have to come onto. He's so good at dodging. Obviously, the close combat's amazing. And what he can do a lot of the time is he can come around a corner and tank one shot, right? So he can maybe dodge it or just suck up the wound with NWI. And then as he moves into close combat with something, doesn't matter whether a TR bot or something in suppression fire or something in a link team, he can just beat them straight up in the face-to-face roll because he's CC25 and MA5 or 4 or whatever you're going to be using. So think about it. Let's say you're up against a Swiss guard in suppression fire with a multi-rifle. So the Swiss guard's going to be hitting on 15s with 3 dice against Miyamoto, right? Whereas Miyamoto is going to be hitting on 25s with 2 dice. So adding 5 to your dice roll, sorry, that's not true. You're up against suppression fire, so it's 22s, for example. I still like Miyamoto's odds there. If you think about it, let's say Miyamoto rolls a 9 and a 20. Well, sorry, a 9 and a 1, let's say that. The Swiss guard has got to beat, effectively, a 11, because Miyamoto's adding 2 to those rolls, because he's CC 22 in that case, with the penalty from suppression fire. So he's got to work quite hard to do that. A lot of the time, Musashi will win the close combat roll, then you're facing AP and explosive, and once he's in the close combat roll, if you've survived, you're not going to survive a turn later, he's just going to wreck you. So for that reason, very, very powerful for moving in on things. Let's say they've got a tag, you come around the corner, they decide to use a flamethrower. Well, you just dodge, Fizz 14, and if you fail the dodge check, you might even pass an armor save, or, you know, fail one and then pass the next one and have NWI. Or you just ignore the flamethrower and just whack him with 2 hits, and each hit is a physical 14 explosive roll with AP. Chances are you're just going to wreck them and trade Miyamoto for that. So having a model that has that capability is a big deal. He doesn't go across the table, you know, as quickly as the Arigato. He doesn't go across there as quickly initially as an Impetuous Trooper. He doesn't start, you know, 24 inches up. He can't superior infiltrate, but he can move into the middle of the table. So I like using him in that sort of similar role that we talked about with Damaru, where he's just wedged up there and he can go and pick things off, and it deters your opponent from moving things into the midfield and leaving them there. Otherwise, they're just going to die to this guy, especially on a clustered, clumped up table. I would look at the table at the start of the tournament game and go, right, you know, do I have a lot of long fire lanes here? Do I use my list which has maybe a Tanko missile launcher or the Kaisotsu long range stuff? Or is it the close range table? And if it's a close range, dense, clustered sort of table, this guy's going to excel. That may be a point to make about JSA in general, is that if you are playing in a location where everybody sets up tables where there's tons of terrain and there's low sight lanes, JSA is going to be much more powerful sectorial, I believe, in that sort of environment than it is going to be in tables where there's big, massive sight lanes for miles, and it's mainly dominated by like TO snipers and heavy armor tags and link teams like the Kamau link team, for example, that can just win those shootouts. JSA is not going to be as great at that. But again, even in that sort of environment, you don't want to run a guy like Musashi. You'll be wanting to run stuff like Kitsune that can deploy over there and get them in, close, whether they like it or not. Lastly, but definitely not least, actually, sorry, before we talk about our last model, let's go back to Musashi and just talk about this team again. So I discussed it earlier. You can run him along with 2 Tankos. If you're going to be doing that, again, it's not going to be a massive shooting link team. I mean, you take the submachine gun there and even the missile launcher. Even the active turn, you're not going to be winning that many face-to-face rolls. It's going to be hard to get into range bands that you want to be in and everything. But these guys up in the midfield can be very, very hard to shift. And boy, do they clobber people if you get more than one of them into close combat at the same time. It's just an absolute overkill. Again, you need to back this group up. If you've got a lot of other stuff in your list which can do work, by all means, but they become expensive once you start compounding them like that. What you can do, I feel, is you can take the Blitzen, Submachine Gun, Flaming Spear, and Musashi, and you've got your nice, 3 order group there. And you can spend the rest of the points in your list on some really pretty cheap stuff. And you can have maybe 14, 15 orders ready to go with a variety of different options. And these guys aren't going to be relied on to do everything in the game, just some of the stuff. They may be covering a particular part of the table or defending this part of the deployment zone and working their way towards the enemy over the stage of the game. Whereas in the meantime, you're still attacking with the Arigato, you're still attacking with your ninja, you're still arrowing with, Eureka or whatever it might be. Okay, so lastly, your Jimbo. Sadly, he's not only working for JSA now. He's available in other sectorials like Ikari. I feel like that's a bit of a rip. I quite like the fact that he was only a JSA option for a while, but it does make some sense given that he's a mercenary. I think you're going to need to see your Jimbo in your lists a lot, because otherwise you're relying on just Saito or Kitsune for throwing smoke. It's too hard to get it down there anywhere else. And, you know, you're going to be using the Rouge Shi or the MSV2 Kinpaitai so often. You really need him in there to be able to provide that smoke. So even better than that, he smokes the table up impetuously. So without even spending any orders, he rocks up there and smoke on 17 if he does it handheld smoke, or 15 if he's shooting the smoke grenade launcher. So he's got both range bands covered. If it's 0 to 8, you throw it. If it's 8 to 16, you launch it with the launcher. And that sets up the rest of your army for that. He also helps defend your deployment zone with his crazy koalas and his nanopulsar and against smoke grenades. And that's something that your lists will desperately need, given that you don't have all these war bands with their chain rifles running around and helping defend. So I think that's very, very important, especially the integrity of your link teams and your more expensive models. And then, of course, there's this attack potential, whereas if they've just hidden everything and, you know, in places where they're not providing any arrows, you rush over there super quickly. You've got your impetuous and your irregular order, so with just, you know, those moves, you're already on their side of the table. And you smoke next to where they're standing, move around and whack something and eliminate it. And he's just 21 points. So if he's taking out an enemy model that is a heavy infantry or a tag or an important sniper, he's doing that dirt cheap. So this guy, he's got to be in your list 60, 70, 80, 90% of the time at least. He hasn't had a sculpt update for a long time, but his model is still really, really, really cool. If you're going to be playing JSA, this is probably going to be one of the very first models that you need to buy if you're serious about getting a list to work and so on. If you've bought the JSA Army box, I would either proxy your Karoshi rider as a Yojimbo or do a conversion, or I'd just go out and buy Yojimbo straight away. And I'm serious about that. I think you really do need him. He's got a DACC close combat weapon, so don't forget that not only does he crush things in close combat, he can kill objectives as well. The Contender can be nice for arrows, but at the end of the day, he's going to be throwing smoke a lot. Being on a bike means that he has a penalty for dodging, but again, you're going to be dodging with the smoke grenade rather than anything else. He's just a bit vulnerable against MSV stuff, because then he does need to do the normal dodge. But don't forget that he can dismount. So Fizz 14, after he's dismounted, he suddenly becomes very good at dodging again, even against MSV2 style stuff. So a very unique unit, a very quirky unit, but a very, very powerful unit. So with so many different roles he can play and so much value he's adding, I definitely recommend him. And that, my people, is JSA. Very fun sectorial, the most thematic sectorial, very, very cool models. I think they're a difficult sectorial to play well at a high level. They are not that forgiving, I think, when it comes to some circumstances, but they can be very rewarding when you see it all work out, and there's nothing more satisfying than rocking up into close combat with a helpless target that's stuck in a smoke cloud and just bashing them with super huge crits and ruining their day that way. Hope you guys enjoyed this rundown. I know a lot of you guys have asked for JSA, and I've talked about JSA a whole bunch in the past as part of my Yuching video and as part of my Uprising video and all of that stuff, but I'm glad we had a chance to really go into depth about this very fun sectorial, and just keep watching. I'll have some more content for you guys pretty soon, I'm hoping.